The morning Diane called me, I was standing in my kitchen in my bathrobe, pouring coffee I hadn't asked for into a mug I'd used every day for 31 years. The mug had Bernard's face on it, a joke gift from my daughter-in-law before she became my daughter-in-law, before I knew what that word would cost us. The coffee was already cold by the time I picked up. Margaret? Diane's voice was strange. Not scared exactly. Careful, the way people get when they're holding something breakable. I need you to listen to me very closely. I set the mug down. Diane Fournier had been our housekeeper for 22 years. She'd been there when my husband Malcolm passed. She'd been there when my son Oliver first brought home the woman he wanted to marry. She was not a dramatic person. She did not call early on a Wednesday morning in October to chat. "What's happened?" I asked. "Not on the phone." "Can you come to the house before Oliver arrives?" "Diane, I'm his mother. I have a key." "I know you do." "Come now, Margaret. Please. And don't tell Oliver you're coming." I drove to their street in 15 minutes. I didn't think anything good on the way there. You don't when you're 63 and you've already buried the person you loved most. You know that the phone call that starts with your name said in that particular careful way is never announcing good news. Oliver's house was a modest 2-story in Canada, the kind of neighborhood where people shoveled their neighbors' driveways without being asked. He bought it 2 years ago, just after he got engaged to Renee. I'd helped him pick the kitchen counters. I'd stood in that empty living room and imagined grandchildren running across the floors. Diane met me at the door before I even knocked. "Come inside," she said, quickly. She led me past the coat rack, Oliver's winter jacket, Renee's boots in a neat row, a child's drawing tacked to the wall that Renee said came from one of her kindergarten students. I'd always thought it was sweet. Now I looked at it differently without knowing why. 2 weeks ago, Diane said, once we were in the kitchen, I found something. She was keeping her voice low even though no one else was in the house. I wasn't snooping, Margaret. I need you to understand that. I was changing the linen in the spare room because Renee had asked me to, and I found a phone, not Oliver's phone, a second phone, tucked under the mattress. I waited. It wasn't locked. Diane folded her hands on the counter. I know I should have left it alone. I almost did. But there was a message on the screen, visible right there, and I read it before I could stop myself. What did it say? Diane looked at me steadily. It said, "Don't forget you're still my wife." The kitchen went very quiet. I took photographs of the screen, Diane said. I've been trying to figure out what to do with them for 2 weeks. I kept thinking I was wrong, that maybe I'd misread it, that maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing. But I couldn't unsee it, Margaret. And today is the day before their wedding. Oliver and Renee were getting married tomorrow, Saturday afternoon. The Chateau Laurier, 200 guests, a string quartet, a cake with fondant roses that had cost more than my first car. I sat down at Oliver's kitchen table and looked at my hands. "Show me the photographs," I said. Diane showed me. She had 4 of them taken with her own phone, the small screen inside the picture slightly glared but readable. The number sending the messages wasn't saved under any name, just a string of digits. The messages spanned 3 weeks. "Don't forget, you're still my wife. You said you'd handle this before December. December is almost here. Zoe keeps asking when you're coming home. What do I tell her? Renee, if you don't respond, I'm going to call him myself." I read them twice. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. I'd expected to shake. Has she responded to any of these? I asked. The replies are deleted, but she clearly has been because the messages keep referencing things she's apparently said. There's one that says, "You can't keep promising me you'll sort it out." I set the phone down on the table. "Her last name," I said slowly. "She told Oliver her last name was Tremblay, Renee Tremblay." "Yes, but that message calls her Renee." "Yes, that's not a last name," I said. "That tells us nothing," I said. "That tells us nothing." "No," Diane agreed, "except that someone who calls her my wife Also calls her by her first name like they've been calling her that for years. I looked at the drawing on the wall in the hallway. Zoe keeps asking when you're coming home. Diane, I said, what do we do? She straightened up, and I saw something in her face that I recognized. The particular resolve of a woman who's already made a decision and is only waiting for permission to act on it. I think we find out who sent these messages before Oliver says, I do tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We started with what we had, which wasn't much. A phone number, 4 text messages, and the name Zoe. Diane had already tried searching the number online. Nothing useful. I sat at Oliver's kitchen island and thought about what I actually knew about Renee Tremblay, and I realized with a slow, cold feeling that it wasn't as much as I should have known after 18 months. She'd told us she grew up in Chicoutimi, that her parents were both gone, that she'd moved to Ottawa for school and stayed because she loved the city. She'd been warm and easy to talk to, the kind of person who remembers what you said 3 conversations ago and asks about it. She'd remembered that I took my tea without milk. She'd remembered that Oliver's father had been an engineer. She'd seemed genuinely curious about our family, our history, what we built. I thought she was interested because she loved Oliver. Now I sat in her kitchen and thought about how carefully she'd been paying attention. The kindergarten class, I said suddenly. She told Oliver she teaches kindergarten at a school in Barhaven. Yes. Oliver's never visited her classroom. She always said it was disruptive to bring parents in. Diane looked at me. Do you think she actually teaches there? I don't know, but it's somewhere to start. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'd do it again without hesitation. I drove to the school she'd named. It took 20 minutes. I went to the front office and said I was Renee Tremblay's mother and I needed to leave something for her. The woman at the desk looked confused. We don't have a Renee Tremblay on staff, she said. Are you sure? She's a kindergarten teacher. She's been here about 2 years. I've been here 4 years, the woman said, not unkindly. I know all the teachers. That name isn't familiar. I thanked her and walked back to my car and sat in the parking lot for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant about being right. I felt sick. I called Diane from the car. She doesn't work there, I said. She's never worked there, I said. She's never worked there. Margaret. Diane's voice was careful again. I found something else while you were gone. There's a Facebook profile, private, but the name shows up in a search. Renee Beaumont-Girard. The profile photo matches, and she's listed as living in Gatineau. Beaumont-Girard, not Tremblay. The phone number, I said. Try searching Beaumont-Girard with it. 2 minutes of silence. There's a listing, Diane said slowly. Old one, from a community notice board. Theodore Beaumont-Girard, looking for a reliable tenant for a basement apartment in Gatineau. The phone number matches. Theodore, that could be a father. Or a brother. She paused. Or a husband. I drove to Gatineau. The address from the old listing was a pale gray duplex on a quiet street near the water. Someone had put window boxes out front, the kind with dried flowers still in them from the summer. There was a minivan in the driveway with a car seat visible through the back window. I sat in my car across the street for several minutes, thinking about what I was doing. I was 63 years old, alone, sitting outside a stranger's house the day before my son's wedding, trying to decide whether to knock on a door that might open onto something I couldn't take back. I thought about Oliver's face when he talks about Renee. That particular softness. He'd been so lonely after Malcolm died. They'd been close, my husband and my son, the kind of close that leaves a specific shape of grief when it's gone. Oliver had taken it hard. He'd been quiet for over a year, and then he'd met Renee at a work charity event and the light had come back into him the way it does when you find someone you've been missing without knowing you were looking. I got out of the car and knocked. The man who answered was perhaps 40. Dark hair going gray at the temples. He was holding a small child on his hip. A girl, maybe 4 years old, dark curls, examining me with solemn interest. Oui? He said, and then, reading my face perhaps, switched to English. Can I help you? "Are you Theodore Beaumont Girard?" I asked. Something shifted in his face. Not fear, more like recognition, as if he'd been waiting for this particular knock for some time. "Yes," he said. "My name is Margaret Holloway. My son is Oliver Holloway. He's getting married tomorrow to a woman named Renee Tremblay." The man closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were full of something exhausted and defeated and deeply sad. "Come inside," he said. The living room was the kind to get when one parent is managing everything alone. Toys in organized bins, a meal half prepared on the kitchen counter visible through the open door, a child's drawing on the fridge, the same careful crayon sun that appears in every child's drawing everywhere. Under the drawing, in careful letters, "Zoe, Arg 4. Theodore set the little girl down, and she immediately went to a corner where a doll was waiting for her. "Her name is Zoe," I said. "Yes." He said it like he'd been carrying the word for a long time. "She's yours and Renee's, yes." He sat down heavily on the couch. "I married Renee 6 years ago. We have Zoe. Renee has been gone, more or less, for almost 2 years. Not gone, she comes back, she calls, but she lives somewhere else." He looked at his hands. "I didn't know about your son until 3 months ago. When I found out, I called her. She told me it wasn't what I thought, that she was sorting something out, that she had a plan." "A plan," I repeated. He looked up at me. "I know what she's doing, Madam Holloway. I'm not a stupid man. She's in debt. We're in debt. There were some bad years. My business failed. We had to remortgage. Then Zoe got sick when she was 2. Nothing serious in the end, thank God. But the bills. We got behind on everything." He shook his head. "Renee found a way out that I would not take. I told her I would not be part of it. But she doesn't always hear me when I'm saying no." "How much does she owe?" He told me a number. It wasn't catastrophic by some measures, but to a family that had already lost everything once, it would have felt like drowning. "She wants to use your son's money to clear it," Theodore said flatly. "She wasn't trying to take everything. I don't think she's a bad person, Madam Holloway. She's a frightened person who made a terrible choice and kept making it because she didn't know how to stop." I looked at Zoe in the corner, singing something under her breath to her doll. "She's still your wife," I said. "Legally, yes." He said it with no triumph. "We've never divorced. She kept saying she would file the paperwork and she never did." I sat with that for a moment. "I need you to come tomorrow," I said. Theodore looked at me with something close to anguish. "Madam Holloway, my son is standing at an altar tomorrow afternoon. He deserves to know the truth before he says vows to a woman who is already married to someone else. You are the only person who can make that real to him. Documents I can bring. Photographs I can show. But you and Zoe, you are the truth that he can't explain away." Theodore was quiet for a long time. Zoe had abandoned the doll and was leaning against his leg, not demanding anything, just present, the way small children press themselves against the people they belong to. "She'll never forgive me," he said finally. "She didn't give you much to protect," I said. Not harshly, just honestly. He looked down at his daughter, then he looked up at me. "What time?" he asked. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in my bedroom and looked at the ceiling and thought about my son. I thought about what he would feel tomorrow when everything he'd built toward for 18 months was dismantled in front of 200 people. I thought about how he would look at me, whether he would be able to understand, not right away, but eventually, that this was love. The difficult kind, the kind that requires you to choose the truth over someone's happiness, which is the hardest choice there is. I thought about Malcolm too. Malcolm, who had been better at the hard things than I ever was. He'd had a quality of unshakable calm that I'd spent 31 years trying to absorb through proximity. I wasn't sure how much of it had taken. "You already know what to do," I told myself. "You've known since Diane showed you that phone. At 7 in the morning I got up, put on the dress I'd bought for the wedding, deep green, the color of the spruce trees behind our old house in the glebe, and drove to the Chateau Laurier. I found Diane near the coat check. She had a folder with her, copies of the photographs she'd taken, the Facebook profile, the address in Gatineau. We didn't have the marriage certificate. Theodore had promised to bring that himself. "Are you ready?" Diane asked. "No," I said honestly. "Let's go anyway." The ceremony was held in the ballroom, which the hotel had dressed beautifully. Ivory and gold, candles everywhere, thin November light coming through the tall windows. Oliver stood at the front with his friend James beside him. He was wearing the charcoal suit we'd chosen together, and he looked so much like his father that I had to stop walking for a moment. He saw me and waved. That wave, the small one, the one that means you made it and I love you and everything is okay all at once. I waved back. I sat in the front row on the groom's side. The room filled around me. I heard people talking about the decorations, the venue, the cold walk-in from the parking garage. Normal wedding talk. The kind you have when you think you're celebrating something real. James leaned toward Oliver and said something that made him laugh. Oliver shook his head, still smiling, and fixed his jacket one more time. I held the folder on my lap under my coat. When Renee appeared at the back of the room, the music changed and everyone stood. She was wearing a simple ivory dress, elegant, no fuss. Her hair was up. She looked genuinely beautiful. And I hated that because it made everything harder, and it also made everything clearer because beauty is not character and presence is not honesty, and loving the way someone makes your child feel is not the same as that person being who they say they are. She walked down the aisle alone, the way she'd insisted on, saying she had no family to walk with her. Another detail I hadn't questioned enough. She reached Oliver. He took her hands. They both had tears in their eyes. The officiant was a civil celebrant Oliver had found through a colleague, a pleasant woman named Christine who'd met with them twice and clearly liked them both. She began with the standard words, the ones about this gathering, this occasion, the significance of the moment. I sat very still. When Christine reached the part about lawful impediments, she did what every officiant does, paused for a single breath, just long enough for tradition, not long enough to mean it. I stood up. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected, given that my legs were not entirely steady beneath me. "I need to stop this. I'm so sorry." The room went silent the way rooms only go silent in moments of genuine emergency, not the polite silence of ceremony, the silence of held breath. Oliver turned to look at me. I have never seen that expression on my son's face in 63 years of knowing him. Confusion layered over love, layered over the beginning of something much worse. "Mom." His voice was very quiet. "What are you doing?" "Sweetheart," I said, and I walked toward him, folder in my hand, keeping my eyes on his face. "I would give anything for this not to be true. I need you to know that first." "Mom." "Renee is married," I said. "She has been for 6 years. Her name isn't Tremblay. It's Beaumont Girard, and her husband and their daughter are here." The room broke open. I can't describe the sound of 200 people reacting to a thing like that because I wasn't listening to them. I was watching my son's face. Oliver looked at Renee, just looked at her, the way you look at something you're waiting to explain itself. Renee said nothing. Her bouquet was shaking slightly. "That's not," she started. "Oliver, she doesn't." The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Theodore Beaumont Girard walked in. He was wearing a jacket that was too formal for him, the kind you put on when you want to show respect for a situation you give anything to be out of. Zoe walked beside him in a small red dress, holding his hand, looking around with the unhurried curiosity of a 4-year-old in a room full of candles. Zoe spotted Renee at the front of the room, and her face changed entirely. "Mammon," she said in the clear, carrying voice of small children everywhere. "Mammon, I came." Renee made a sound I won't describe. Oliver let go of her hands. He let go of her hands and stepped back, and I watched the thing I'd been dreading. That particular moment when someone understands that what they thought was real was not real, and the understanding moves through them, not like a thought, but like something physical. "Is she yours?" Oliver asked Theodore. His voice was controlled in the way that people get controlled when they're managing something enormous. Yes, Theodore said. He'd stopped a few meters away. He wasn't performing anything. He just looked like a man standing inside a fact. And Renee is my wife. I have our marriage certificate. I brought it because... He glanced at me. Because it was the right thing to bring. Oliver turned to Renee. I have been watching my son for 35 years. I have watched him figure out mathematics problems and argue with referees and grieve his father and fall in love. I know his face. I know every expression his face is capable of making. The one he made now was new. When were you going to tell me? He asked. Renee opened her mouth. I watched her calculate. She was, I realized, extremely good at calculating. It's not, she started. It's complicated. I was going to... When? Oliver said again. Just the one word. She stopped. He nodded very slowly, the way people nod when they've received information they needed even though they didn't want it. Then he looked at Zoe, who was still holding her father's hand and looking between the adults with the careful attention of a child who knows the grown-ups are doing something serious. She's 4? He asked. Yes, Theodore said. Oliver looked at me. You found out this morning? Yesterday evening, I said. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I was afraid you wouldn't. No. He shook his head once. I wouldn't have. You're right. He looked down for a moment. I would have defended her. Christine, the officiant, had stepped back several feet. Someone in the front rows was quietly crying. James, Oliver's best man, had moved closer to Oliver without seeming to realize he'd done it. Oliver looked at Renee one more time. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to be honest with me for perhaps the first time. Did you ever love me? Even a little? Or was this entirely? It wasn't entirely. Renee's voice broke. Oliver, I want you to know that That isn't an answer, he said. The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had passed between them. Oliver turned to Christine. I think we're done, he said, with a politeness that was almost surreal. He walked down the steps from the small raised platform. He walked past the first row of guests, past James, past the flowers and candles and all the carefully arranged evidence of a life they'd been about to start. He stopped beside me. Can we go? He asked. Wherever you want, I said. I put my arm through his and we walked out of the Chateau Laurier together, through the lobby and out into the cold gray Saturday of November in Ottawa, where the canal was half frozen and the wind off the rideau was sharp enough to mean it. Oliver stood on the steps of the hotel in his charcoal suit and his good shoes and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, Dad would have found her out in about a week, wouldn't he? Probably, I said. Not a criticism, he said. Just, he exhaled. I didn't think I needed to be as careful as he was. I thought I'd found someone who made that kind of careful unnecessary. That's what she wanted you to think, I said. He nodded. Yeah? He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the street. What happens to her now? There will likely be charges. Theodore is speaking with a lawyer. Diane filed a report this morning before I came. And the daughter? Zoe? She stays with her father. She has a father who came here today specifically because he wanted to do the right thing, even though it cost him. Oliver considered that. He seems like a decent person. He does. Funny how that works out, Oliver said, not quite bitterly. Diane appeared at the top of the steps with our coats. She handed Oliver his without a word, and he looked at her for a moment. Thank you, Diane, he said, for finding it. For telling my mother. Of course, she said in her matter-of-fact way that managed not to diminish the size of what she'd done. Oliver put on his coat. He looked out at the street again. Then he said quietly, I'm really glad you were there, Mom. There wasn't anywhere else I was going to be, I said. We went home. We ordered soup from a place on Elgin that Malcolm had loved and that Oliver and I still go to when we need to feel close to him. We sat at my kitchen table and ate it and didn't talk about Renee at all. And talked about Malcolm a fair bit, and talked about a property Oliver's firm was developing near Westboro that he was excited about, and talked about Christmas, which was coming. Around 9 o'clock, Oliver said he was going to go home and sleep. At the door, he hugged me for a long time. "I know it'll take a while," he said, "to feel like myself again." "It will," I agreed. "But you will." He nodded. "I believe you." He nodded. "I believe you." He stepped back. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, sweetheart." I stood at the door and watched him walk to his car. He moved the way Malcolm moved, that particular unhurried stride, the way of a person who knows where they're going even when they don't. When he got to the car, he turned and lifted a hand, and I lifted one back. Then he drove away, and I closed the door, and I stood in my hallway in my green dress with the folder still on the entryway table. I thought about the text message. "Don't forget, you're still my wife." The anger in it, the desperation. The months of a woman constructing a careful, alternate life, memorizing what Oliver liked, learning what his family had built, deciding it was easier to take something than to ask for help. I don't know if Renee Beaumont-Girard is a bad person. I think she's a frightened one who forgot that frightened people still have choices. I picked up the folder and put it in the filing cabinet, which is where things go when they're finished. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea without milk, and stood at the window looking out at the street, thinking that the city looked very quiet for a Saturday night in November, and that quiet wasn't always a bad thing, and that my son was going to be all right eventually, the way people who are loved properly always eventually are. I've thought a lot about what I would have done if Diane hadn't found that phone, if she'd straightened the mattress, smoothed the fitted sheet, and walked out of that room without a second thought. I think about Oliver standing at that altar in his charcoal suit, saying words he meant entirely to a woman who meant none of them. I think about the years that would have followed, the slow erosion of trust, the money quietly redirected, the eventual unraveling that would have come regardless, because it always does, because these things always do. The truth doesn't disappear because no one's looking at it, it just waits. What I keep returning to is this: I ignored my instincts for 18 months. I sat across dinner tables from Renee and noticed things, the way her eyes moved around the room before they settled on a person, the questions that were slightly too specific, the interest that felt like research. And I told myself I was being the difficult mother-in-law, the woman who couldn't let her son go. I chose Oliver's happiness over my own unease, and I told myself that was generosity. It wasn't entirely. Some of it was the easier choice dressed up as the loving one. Diane made the harder choice. She found something she wasn't looking for, and she sat with it for 2 weeks, turning it over, making sure she wasn't wrong, and then she called me instead of looking away. That took more courage than I gave her credit for at the time. It's easy to love people when loving them costs you nothing. Diane put her job on the line, her relationship with Oliver, her place in our household. She did it anyway, because she understood something I've been working to understand properly ever since. Real care for someone sometimes means handing them information they don't want. Theodore understood it too. He drove to the Chateau Laurier in a jacket that didn't quite fit, and he walked down that aisle with his daughter's hand in his, because he knew Oliver deserved the truth more than he deserved to avoid a difficult room. He had every reason to stay home. He had a child to protect and a life to rebuild and no particular obligation to a stranger's wedding. He came anyway. That's what decency looks like when it costs something. Oliver is doing better now. Not healed. That's the wrong word for what takes years, but better. He went back to the office. He's working on a project in Westboro he's genuinely excited about. He calls me on Sunday evenings, which he didn't always do before. Last month, he told me he'd started being more careful about what he overlooked, that he'd learned something about the difference between trusting someone and choosing not to examine them too closely. I thought that was one of the wisest things I'd heard him say. What Renee did came from desperation, and I understand desperation. I don't think she woke up planning to become the person she became. I think she made one decision to manage an impossible situation and then made another to protect the first one, and then another until she was so far inside the lie that the exit was no longer visible. That's how these things work. Not with a single catastrophic choice, but with 100 small ones, each one feeling survivable in the moment. The consequence of all those choices was standing in the Chateau Laurier in handcuffs with mascara on her cheeks while her 4-year-old daughter asked where she was being taken. That's the part I don't take satisfaction in. Zoe didn't choose any of this. She's going to grow up with a mother who's absent for years, and that's a damage that doesn't sort itself out cleanly regardless of what anyone deserves. But I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed silent. Oliver's future would have been the cost of my discomfort, and I've lived long enough to know that the comfortable choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing, and the gap between them is exactly where you find out what you're actually made of. I found out I was made of enough. Just barely and not without help, but enough